I don't lead the most thrilling life, but whenever someone asks me for a scary story, this is the one I tell. I was 15 at the time, about to start my sophomore year of high school. I grew up in a typical beach town, packed with tourists during the summer, but a ghost town as soon as the season ended. The bars and restaurants all closed down, leaving just the locals, the sky, and the ocean. If you've never been to the shore during the off-season, I'd strongly recommend it. It's one of the strangest yet most calming feelings you can experience in life. Our house was on a street called Surf Avenue, just a block from the beach. Ironically, I know how to surf. It would have been pretty pathetic if I lived on a street named Surf Avenue and didn't. I'd lived there my whole childhood, so the boardwalk and sand were practically part of my personality. I don't live in that house anymore, but the property has stayed in the family, so it still feels like a piece of me. At the time, I was on my high school's varsity cross-country team and was obsessive about staying in shape even during the off-season. Summers get insanely hot, so I usually ran early in the morning or late at night to avoid the heat. That night, I decided to go for a late-night run. I'd stayed up late with a friend the night before and slept in, so I didn't have much of a choice. I never brought my phone with me when I ran. It was annoying not having music, but even that little bit of extra weight would throw me off. I had this rinky-dinky Garmin watch to track my distance and pace, and the only other thing I carried was my house keys. My parents were incredibly uptight about keeping the house locked, so I always stuffed my keys in my shorts pocket, even if they were home. I decided to stick to the boardwalk that night. The surface was soft enough to be easy on my legs, but not as brutal as running on sand. I started zoning out after a few miles, enjoying that euphoric runner's high. I always tell people that if you can push past the first mental barrier around 3 miles, the rest of the run is easy and borderline enjoyable. I was in that perfect rhythm, listening to the slap of my shoes against the wood and the distant sound of the ocean, when I heard it, a faint clink. I stopped and checked my pocket. Empty. My stomach dropped. It was my keys. I crouched down, peering through the gaps in the boardwalk, but it was pitch black underneath. There was no way I'd be able to retrieve them from where I was. I started cursing, yelling out loud. The adrenaline from the run was still pumping through me, and I was furious that this detour had ruined my rhythm. I knew my parents would kill me if I came back without those keys. So without thinking, I jumped off the side of the boardwalk and headed down to sand. It was also a matter of pride. I wasn't going to walk away from my personal belongings. The smell under the boardwalk hit me instantly, rotten seaweed mixed with stale beer. It was damp, heavy, and every step kicked up sand and trash. My watch backlight was the only thing guiding me, and it wasn't much help. I crouched down where I thought my keys had fallen, but they were nowhere in sight. Just clumps of sand and scraps of garbage. I thought about leaving them, but decided I'd come this far. Turning back now would mean I'd gotten covered in garbage and stench for nothing. I tried shifting the sand around, thinking maybe they'd fallen beneath the surface, but after a few minutes, frustration crept in. Had I misjudged the spot by that much? I climbed back up to the boardwalk, stood where I'd stopped running, and tried to figure out how to pinpoint the spot underneath. That's when I got the idea to use my shoelace as a marker. I knelt down, untied it, and slipped it between the planks, letting it hang. That way, I could crawl back under and spot it easily. As I stood up, something tugged on the lace, and it instantly disappeared into the crack. Not a breeze, not me moving weirdly. Something from below had pulled it. I took a step back, staring at the spot where my shoelace had just been. There was someone under the boardwalk. My first instinct was to run home, but the thought of someone having my house keys, knowing where I lived, made my blood boil. Our address was etched into them, so I couldn't just leave some stranger with that kind of access. Call it stupid teenage confidence, but I took a deep breath, jumped back into the sand, and crawled under again. The air felt heavier this time, and I braced myself for a fight. At one point, I heard faint shuffling ahead of me. My chest tightened as I swung my watch light toward the sound, but I saw nothing, just more sand and beams. The shuffling came again, this time from a different direction. That's when I realized the noise wasn't coming from one spot. There were multiple people under there. Common sense hit me like a freight train. What did I expect to happen? Fight some crackhead living on the boardwalk? That was suicide. I turned to get out of there, trying not to panic. But before I could make it all the way out, something cold latched onto my ankle. It was a hand. I screamed as fingernails dug into my skin. I kicked as hard as I could, and my foot connected with something. Whoever was holding me let go, and I scrambled out, my legs and arms scraping against the sand and wood. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. I pounded on the door until my dad opened it. He was livid, but before he could fully flip out, I explained everything. The keys, the shoelace, the people under the boardwalk. The commotion woke my mom, who was furious at first, but when she saw the marks on my ankle, her expression shifted to fear. My dad called the police, and the next morning, we had a locksmith change all the locks on the house. For a couple of days, things felt normal again. I thought that was the end of it, just a weird, messed up night I tried to forget. But then, a few mornings later, I woke up to loud knocking at the front door. It was way too early for visitors. I looked through the peephole but saw no one. Confused, I opened the door and glanced around. No one was in sight, but as I was about to close the door, I noticed something on the doormat. My shoelace, the one from that night. We got a security system installed that afternoon. For weeks afterward, my family lived in constant fear, but nothing ever happened after that. When I think back to this experience, I still can't rationalize the events that took place. Even though I don't live in that house anymore, it still creeps me out that some random stranger knows where our beach house is. The thing about living in a beach town during the off-season is that it feels deserted. The tourists are gone, the storefronts are boarded up, and the boardwalk, the heart of the town in the summer, is just an empty skeleton. I like it, though. It's peaceful. That's why, for the longest time, I went for late-night runs on the boardwalk during the off-season. It was my detox from life and all the stress that comes with it. Sometimes, you just need to be away from people. There was something about the sound of the waves and the rhythmic slap of my sneakers against the wooden planks that calmed me. It made me feel like I had the whole world to myself. Tonight was no different. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and damp wood. The only lights came from the occasional street lamp, casting long, lonely shadows. I was maybe a mile in when I got that feeling, the one where you just know you're not alone. I glanced over my shoulder. A man stood in the distance, not walking, not moving, just standing there on the boardwalk, facing me. I swallowed and turned back around, shaking it off. It was probably nothing, maybe just another local taking a walk. But no matter what, it's still an eerie sight. I kept running. But a few minutes later, the feeling of being followed or watched came back even stronger. My heart thudded, not from exertion but from something else. The curiosity to turn around again thickened. So I did. He was closer, still not moving, still just standing there, facing me. A deep, crawling unease settled in my stomach. I picked up the pace, taking out my one headphone. My feet pounded against the wood, my breath coming quicker. But every few moments, I heard footsteps behind me, in sync with mine. I turned again. He was even closer, but still completely still. I broke into a sprint, but the boardwalk felt like an endless trap, stretching too far in both directions. My car was at the very end, parked by the beach entrance. I just had to make it there. I ran harder than I ever had before, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. But I refused to stop. Every few seconds, I turned my head just enough to check, and every single time, he was a little closer, still standing, still watching. I didn't understand how he was able to stop, so suddenly every time I turned around, I wasn't even looking where I was going anymore, just focused on getting away. The boardwalk exit finally came into view, and I nearly sobbed in relief when I saw my car. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely press the unlock button. Finally, the lights flashed, and I yanked the door open, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. I turned the key in the ignition and backed the car out of the spot. As I put the car in drive and whipped the wheel to the left, I looked ahead. The man was standing directly in front of my car, right where it had just been. I only saw him briefly, his hood up, covering most of his face. I cranked the wheel to the left and almost spun out as I sped away. The entire way home, I didn't care if I ran a red light, swerved, or nearly spun out. I just drove. When I got home, I locked every door, every window, every possible entrance. I didn't sleep that night, and I've had a couple of nightmares referencing that experience, both in which that man appeared in some form, watching me or chasing me. My mind created its own versions of what he looked like, and they were not pretty images. I haven't done a winter run on the boardwalk since. This happened last summer. I was 22, spending a weekend at the shore with friends in the cheapest Airbnb we could find. It was the last night of our stay, and we'd been out on the beach all night with a bonfire, just hanging out, drinking, and talking. By the end, most of my friends were ready to call it, but I wasn't tired yet. I figured I'd walk off the bus for a bit and then find my way back to the Airbnb. The boardwalk at night has this weird peacefulness to it. Everything's empty. After wandering around for a while, I realized I really had to pee. I'm not the type to just do it in public, so I spotted one of those old, beat-up public boardwalk bathrooms. Not ideal, but I didn't feel like holding it. I pushed the door open and immediately regretted it. The place smelled awful, like a mix of bleach and whatever it was trying to cover it up. I went to the farthest stall, and that's when I heard the door creak open again. I listened as footsteps slowly walked around, circling the bathroom. At times, it sounded like there was more than one person. Eventually, the footsteps stopped near the sinks. No movement, no coughs, nothing. I finished up and tried to push the stall door open, but it didn't budge. I jiggled the latch, but it was still stuck. I wanted to punch the door. I was so angry and uncomfortable. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. I got this really nasty feeling in my chest, like someone was holding the door shut. I tried to shove the door with my shoulder, but it still didn't move. The adrenaline kicked in, and I decided I wasn't just going to sit there. I charged the door with all my force, and it finally gave way, sending me stumbling out. As I burst out of the store, I noticed the bathroom door swing shut, like someone had just walked out. I scanned the bathroom. It was empty. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. I froze, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? I thought maybe it was one of my friends screwing with me, but they'd all left already. I heard movement in one of the stalls behind me. I whipped my head around and locked eyes with a man. He was really hairy, with pale skin, dressed like a teenager but looking at least 50 years old. I didn't waste another second. I climbed onto the sink beneath a grimy window near the ceiling, shoved it open, and scrambled out. My knee hit the ground hard, but I didn't care. I just ran. When I got a safe distance away, I called the cops. They showed up quickly, but by the time they checked the bathroom, the guy was long gone. There were no cameras, no shops open that late, nothing to help identify him. The officers told me I was smart to escape through the window, and that was that. I had to leave the beach the next day, so I never got any kind of update on the situation. I'm sorry if I mess up some details of this next story. It happened when I was really young. I don't remember exactly how old I was, maybe 8 or 9, but I know it was during one of those summers my family spent at my grandparents' beach house. It was kind of like the family hub every summer. A bunch of us, my siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, would pile in for weekends or weeks at a time. The house wasn't super fancy, but it had a million bedrooms and could sleep our whole family easily. It was also really close to the beach, so I used to spend entire days playing in the sand and exploring the neighborhood on my bike. That summer was different, though. There was a big hurricane forecasted, and the beach town was scrambling to take precautions months in advance. They built these massive sand dunes along the shore as a makeshift barrier. To a kid, they looked like castle walls. Usually, when you're standing on the boardwalk facing the beach, you can see the ocean stretching out in front of you. But those dunes completely blocked the view. You'd walk along the boardwalk, and instead of water, there was just this giant wall of sand. The beach also closed after a certain hour. The lifeguards would go off duty, and people weren't technically permitted to go on the beach, but that never really stopped us locals. The town was safe, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and letting kids roam wasn't considered a big deal. I was a bit of a troublemaker back then, always pushing boundaries. That's what led me to sneak out that evening. It wasn't dark yet, but I hadn't asked permission to go out. I just wanted some alone time. I stepped outside, barefoot, and made my way toward the boardwalk. I was surprised to see how empty it was. Not a single soul outside. It felt deserted. I walked along the boardwalk for a while, half expecting to see someone, but I never did. It was like the whole beach was asleep. I was about to head back when I noticed something alarming, a thin trail of smoke rising from beyond one of the dunes. At first, I thought it was just fog, but on closer inspection, it was smoke, like from a fire. Smoke on the beach wasn't that unusual, even though it was against the rules. Sometimes tourists lit bonfires, but there was something about how empty everything was that made the smoke feel wrong. I climbed the sand dune a little ways away from the smoke. By the time I reached the top, I was covered in sand. I looked down the other side and saw what I expected, a bonfire, but it was completely isolated. No chairs, no coolers, nothing. Just a fire burning in the middle of an empty beach, as if whoever had lit it had abandoned it. I slid down the dune and made my way over to it. I stood there for a second, just staring at it. I didn't know what else to do, so I started kicking sand onto it until the flames were suffocated. I inspected the fire pit and made some eerie discoveries. There were clothes, little kids' clothes, like stuff I'd wear, kids' shoes, socks, half-buried fabrics. I bent down, using a stick to poke around, and realized the fire had mostly been clothes. Then I saw what else had been burning, photos, or at least what was left of them. Most were charred beyond recognition, but one had survived enough for me to make out a face. It was a boy, probably around my age. He looked a little bit like me, like if one of my parents told me he was a distant cousin, I'd believe them. The picture made me really scared. I felt myself wanting to run, but then I heard a voice shout, "Hey!" from somewhere in the distance. I looked up and saw a man coming toward me from down the beach. He was bold, staggering every few steps as if he were drunk or something worse. He yelled, "Hey, kid," and started moving more quickly toward me. I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. He yelled, "Don't you go anywhere," and that was what did it for me. My little brain finally caught up to my body, and I started running toward the sand wall. The sand made running hard, but I felt like I was in a life-and-death situation. I started climbing the dune, and I could hear him yelling obscenities behind me. He was getting closer. Just as I reached the top,